Hello, my name is Scott Lancaster. I'm one of the research and instruction librarians at Waters Library at A&M Commerce. And this is a session on conducting literature reviews and specifically psychology and counseling. I'm going to share my screen because I have a short few slides to show. What the workshop will cover will be the purpose of a literature review and the types of literature review, selecting resources, identifying keywords, and developing search strategies, evaluating sources, organizing your material and keeping up to date, and then finally writing a literature review, which will end with a kind of an example from a dissertation that was recently done. First of all, what is a literature review? A literature review is a synthesis, not a summary, of previous work in a specific area. It should bring together different aspects of the literature in that area and create something new with it. The result is a critical evaluation of the current theory and methods of a particular topic, reflecting what is known, how it is known, and what is unknown. The objective of a literature review is to provide the reader, which would be your advisor and your committee in the case of a dissertation or thesis, with the knowledge needed to understand your research project. It's not an explanation of everything you know about a particular subject. Because of this distinction, you need first to perform a thorough investigation of the literature and then synthesize only the material relevant to your research question. So you start out really broad. You try to understand as much as you can about the topic, but then you're not going to include everything in your literature review. It's very specific and targeted. The goals of a literature review: through the process of creating a literature review, you should refine the scope of your research, rationalize the significance of the research problem, distinguish what has been done from what needs to be done, discover important relevant variables, relate ideas and theories to applications, avoid fruitless approaches, and place your research in a historical context. You typically will write two versions of your literature review during the research process. The first one is a comprehensive review of the literature with the objective of teaching yourself what is known about your interest area. The goal is to broadly learn what has been done and what needs to be done. Your research questions emerge from this first stage. And you might be starting this in, like, if you're in a 595 course that teaches research literature techniques. I know you don't have to cover, when I took a course like that, I ended up changing my dissertation topic completely by the time I got around to writing a dissertation. But the work that I did in that preparation course taught me what needed to be done. Hopefully, though, you will not duplicate your efforts, and you'll be efficient and work on your final project from the beginning. And the second version of a literature review that you write is a focused review of the literature with the objective to inform the reader about what is known and unknown in your research area, drawn from a narrower set of literature based on the research questions developed. And you basically are going to end up cutting out a lot of things that aren't needed, but you had to have gone through that process to inform yourself about the topic. How long should a literature review be? I've heard, people have often asked this. There's not really a specific answer. Writing and deciding the scope of the literature review is complicated. Students may ask how many articles they should cite, how many papers they should write. That depends. General guidelines suggest that 5 to 10 reference articles is probably not enough, but more than 200 is probably too many. Likewise, 1 to 2 pages is not enough, but more than 50 is probably too many. So preparing to write a literature review, a useful first step when starting your dissertation is to identify the relevant keywords to help navigate through your existing literature. When researching for information, remember to give preference to primary research. And this is what we often tell in when we teach people how to do research in the library resources is have in mind the keywords that describe the topic and the parts of the topic that you're wanting to do, but be ready to come up with new keywords. And using these keywords, perform an initial search of the literature using one of the citation databases. Create an initial bibliography of 10 to 20 articles, and then create a broader bibliography of 50 to 80 articles. And usually like the 10 to 20 will be very specifically about your topic, and the 50 to 80 will be more broadly about not just your specific focus, but the theories or the population that you're studying, or the history of what you're dealing with. This is a sample of a literature review that I wanted to show. It was done in 2019 by Crystal, well, actually she's called Elaine Valley. It was, and I was brought into it because it had a library component, middle school librarians' perceptions and promotion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning LGBTQ books. And I'm going to go to first, I'm going to stop sharing and go to actually her paper or her dissertation. And show you the kind of the way, I don't know, you may be kind of thinking, how do I start with this? And when I actually was writing my dissertation, when I was doing the proposal, and my PhD is in English, but the research is similar, but it was a totally different topic from anything that would be in psychology or counseling. But I didn't really know how to approach writing the proposal, and so and my topic was 1599 piece of work that was about the Spanish Fury, which was like the 9/11 of the 16th century. It was a play that was written about that. And I asked a friend of mine if I could look at his proposal, and his proposal was about American literature. But I outlined it, and what I'm going to show you in that I've done in Elaine's literature review section is how I would go about outlining if I was going to use this as a template. And first of all, this is from the first chapter, just to show you what the problem is that she's identifying that needs to be investigated. And it's this sentence here: according to these results, she's established a lot of history in the first chapter. There is an ongoing difficulty for LGBTQ students to find LGBTQ related resources in their school libraries. And she's talking specifically about middle school libraries somewhere in the DFW area. And she did a study herself where she collected both quantitative and qualitative data. She looked at the holdings of 10 school libraries, meaning she looked at the card catalog, and she identified the LGBTQ books that they had, and she compared that to a list of recommended books that she had identified. And so she came up with quantitative data in that way. And then she interviewed the librarians themselves for various things about their attitude, as well as how their district approached what was in the school library. So that in that way, she's collecting qualitative data. So now we'll look at the chapter on the literature review. And she starts with an introduction where she just kind of gives an overview of the landscape of the problem, the kind of the context of the issue that she's looking at. And then she gets into societal responses. She's got 4 pages basically that are just setting up everything. She talks about problems that LGBTQ people have in society. And then she goes through a very brief history of societal upheavals in the 70s and 80s. And notice that everything is like cited. She's got citations, but she's not directly quoting anything. She's just using, she's not saying anything that she's not able to point to some source and say, that's where I got it from. And then she moves into the publishing history. So first she's talked about the societal history. Now she's moving more into what her individual topic is, which is books and books in libraries. But she's talking about how, the books began to be published after World War II, and these were mass market paperbacks. And then in the 70s, there started being actually more kind of mainstream books that would be collected in libraries. And then she moves into the academic publishing, which is actually where her literature review is going to draw from, because she's going to be looking at the academic literature that is studying this problem. And she has a very brief overview in this part that I've outlined here. And then in her summation of this section, she identifies 4 main areas: the needs and perceptions of the individuals, the perceptions of the librarians, the public library access and holdings, and the library services. And so these 4 things is going to be the framework for her literature review, because you've got to come up with some way to put the information in some kind of order that makes sense. And she has come up with four sections in her literature review. So now, turning to, before she gets to the review of the literature, she also identifies the theory that she's going to be using. And there's critical theory, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and she connects these to her research topic. With the critical theory is going to be how the lens that she's looking at the power dynamics that exist in when she's interviewing her librarians. And the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are going to be how she identifies how well or why the books should support the needs of the students. And then caring theory, which I'd not heard of before, but that's how she sort of is a call to action in a way. And so now she's moved to the actual review of the literature review. So she's had sort of a few pages that set everything up, that give a history, and she's established I've put my literature review into 4 sections, and then she goes through them one at a time. So she has the first one, and then she has the second one, and the third one, and you'll see this is much longer, and then the last one, and then her summary then kind of gives her conclusions for which actually set up the need for her dissertation. She says there needs to be more investigation into the holdings. There should be an examination of the practices of school librarians and their attitudes. And there also needs to be an investigation, a need to investigate school librarians' knowledge, or in other words, their preparation, their education into these fields. And, so she's identified the very things that she's identified what she's going to proceed to do in her dissertation. And looking back at the outline that I created, this is what, if I was doing this, I would like to turn to a successful literature review like this, especially if this was done with a person who was my advisor, and I would outline it so I could see the logic that, the steps that are being gone through in this. Oh, hello, Janice. We're sort of midway through, but I'm making a recording, so I will send you a link to the recording when I've got it ready. We're looking now at an outline that I did of the last dissertation, or the last dissertation committee I was on, an outline of the literature review section. She basically has 4 sections: the introduction, where she identifies the problem that she's looking at, and then a short part where she identifies the theoretical framework that she is using to establish the questions and the type of data she's collecting. And then the larger part is a review of the literature, which is divided into 4 areas, which she also has identified the framework for making that those 4 areas are the reason for doing that is described in her theoretical framework. And then finally, in her summary, she identifies 3 needs that her review of the literature review has suggested. These 3 things need to be investigated. And in fact, those are the 3 things that her dissertation goes on to investigate and establish some findings from. And you can find that dissertation and all the others that have been done at A&M Commerce in the ProQuest database. And so you're going to be looking in doing your literature review, you probably already have done a lot of research, if not in your dissertation topic, in writing other papers. And you understand that there's basically 3 types of sources. Primary sources are immediate firsthand accounts of a topic. In a historical sense, it could be documents like the Declaration of Independence, or a letter that someone writes. It could be a text if it's a literary study, like what I did my doctorate in. It could be survey data. If many people who are doing their dissertation here will come up with surveys and send them out to a targeted group and collect numerical data. Or it can be reports of original kind of experimental research in the natural sciences. And then there are secondary sources, which are books, articles, or reports that are based on primary sources. This would be what you're finding when you have peer-reviewed articles in scholarly books. Many of the things like what Elaine cited in that example that I showed. And then finally, there's tertiary sources, which are a synthesis of secondary sources for the general reader. And this would be like the textbooks that you use in your classes, encyclopedias, mass market publications. I know at one time there was a psychology class that had the assignment to find like a popular magazine that made reference to some academic study, and even something like a People magazine, and then that referenced some psychological study that was done. But then you had to find the actual peer-reviewed article that it was referring to, and they're not footnoted, so it's a kind of an investigation to do. These tertiary sources are great ways to brainstorm and come up with ideas and just educate yourself about the general background in whatever you're dealing with, but they wouldn't be something that should be frequently cited in a dissertation. You should rely on either secondary or primary sources. Primary and secondary sources should be relied on if you're making a scholarly argument, because they make up the conversation in which you're seeking to participate. So you are becoming part of the scholarly conversation about the topic. And that was a big transition that for me, and as I've seen for graduate students now, where you've, as an undergraduate and as a beginning graduate student, you are sort of a consumer of scholarly material. Now you're moving into becoming a producer of scholarly material, and it requires effort to acquaint yourself with the background of but it also requires some level of confidence, I think, to decide, okay, my ideas are important, and I have important things that need to be heard just as much as the people that I've been reading all these years. Tertiary sources can give you a good feel for a topic. They may be written by distinguished scholars, but they're limited in scope because they're intended for a broad audience who may be unfamiliar with the topics that they address. They tend to oversimplify the research. And remember that the research process is not linear. I think of it like a scavenger hunt. In the past, researchers often browse the shelves to find similar books because of the way the call number system works. Finding an article can lead forward or it can lead backward to the articles it cites or the ones that cite it. You will also find subject terms related to articles you find that will be useful in future searches. So you're not going to just have a direct, straight beeline like the first illustration here, but you're going to go on kind of a convoluted path. That's the way many people approach research now. They especially if you're having to acquaint yourself with everything about a field, you learn a lot, but you end up focusing on a very specific few. And you will explore online databases. I hope that you're familiar with them. If you're not, I can help you decide what databases would be important. Along with books, online databases are a valuable asset of the library. And we pay, you wouldn't believe, you'd be surprised how much money we pay for databases. Like journals, databases are subscription items, and each library's subscriptions will differ based on local needs and resources. Some databases are general, meaning they're going to cover all academic topics. And some are specific. There'll be a psychology database or a counseling database. You should become familiar with the major databases in your field to which the library subscribes, and you should learn how to use them. You can also use the internet for academic research. I found useful things doing internet searches. However, it requires extra effort on your part. You get your bearings with respect to a new topic regarding everything you learn is provisional. I mean, I use Wikipedia to learn about a background of something, or to find out different ways of terming an idea. Like when I was writing something in a lesson about global warming, I went to Wikipedia just to remind myself of the different ways that people call it, like climate change and greenhouse effect and all the different terms that people use, which all have kind of different nuances to them, but I just used it as a way to remind myself. You can explore potential keywords to use in more systematic research. But that's what I do. And like I was saying with Wikipedia, I take ideas from that and go to the library databases with the terms that I found. You can also remind yourself of dates or facts, but make sure you check against more reliable sources. I wouldn't use something off the internet as the final thing unless I was extremely sure where it came from and that it was updated and I knew who wrote it. You can locate the authors of sources whom you might wish to contact. There's been a couple of times somebody knew of an instrument, like a psychological instrument that had been developed by somebody either for their research or for their dissertation, and they wanted, the person I was helping wanted to use it, and we just went on the internet and found where the person had a faculty position at, I think, Mary Hardin Baylor in the last case I worked with. And so, the internet is useful in doing that. And Google Scholar can find some material that's not indexed in databases even. But you need to avoid common mistakes, not employing the best keywords and identifying the best sources. You have a certain keyword in mind or terms when you start doing your research, but the database may not use those terms. When I put together something about the global warming, and I was looking at how it has affected cattle farming, I went into the agriculture database using the term that I thought of, cattle, and I pretty quickly saw just from looking at my results that database more often used the term livestock instead of cattle. So I switched to using that term. And you could terms changed. Some terms that were used 30 years ago are now pejorative and wouldn't be used. But if it's a term that the database used, or then you need to use that term to find it. And also a common mistake, not relating your study's findings to the findings of the literature review. So, make sure that you connect you probably start out, for instance, with the dissertation that I showed you that Miss Valley did. She supposed that she was going to find that there was inadequate LGBTQ books in middle school libraries. That was just her supposition. And she found literature that supported that. And then she actually then in her study found it to be true. But you can't, if she hadn't found that, if she'd found the literature was saying it's completely adequate, then she would have, she couldn't just make that look like it said something that it didn't. So you need to make sure that your findings are connected to what you find in the literature review. Relying on secondary rather than primary sources, or tertiary rather than secondary sources. And that's going to depend on what your topic is, or blindly accepting other researchers' findings rather than critically examining them. Remember, you're sort of stepping up and becoming part of the conversation, so you need to question everything that you're evaluating, and you can give an opinion about it. You can say, I don't agree with this, or I think that this, is wrong in this one area, or at least you need to examine it. There are a few, these are just some examples of things that I can show you if you want, but there are library research guides that we have written. I've got one I wrote on the APA citation style. There's one on literature reviews that I wrote. There are research guides on PsycInfo, how to use that. We have the A to Z database list, which you can actually, let me I'm going to go to the library homepage and show you these things that I'm talking about. Oh, wait. Okay, the library homepage. The research guides are here. Be aware that, well, if you go to owner and go to my name, I've got one on PsycInfo and one on literature reviews, as well as one on dissertations. And I think it's Megan that did the one on APA, if you want a little help with APA. Those are the research guides that we wrote. And you can look at the databases. We have 267 now. You can pick by subject, like you could go to counseling, but keep in mind, these are just ones that you may have a topic that sort of branches out to something else. Like I always point out, we've got a religion and philosophy. We've got 2 religion databases, and you may have, if you've got sort of a faith component to your topic, you might find something in there that's useful. We have a couple of LGBTQ and sexuality gender watch databases. We have Ethnic News Watch database. So there could be, depending on your topic, we might point you to something outside of the traditional psychology or counseling or education databases. You can also contact any of us librarians if you go to Ask a Librarian. And you have the, nobody's monitoring chat now, so this would go to sort of an email-like interface. And whoever is assigned to answer this at 8 o'clock in the morning will see this and answer you. But if it's between 8 and 5, somebody should be monitoring chat, and you would have real-time interaction with us. Also, if you go to, if you're looking at the bibliography at the end of an article or at the end of a dissertation, you can go to journals. So if you've got a specific citation and you know it's from Journal of American, or Psychiatric Nurses, or no, American Journal of Community Psychologists, say it was that, you could go here, and then you would then find, like you would know what year it is and what volume it is, and you could drill down to the actual article. That's how you can use, if you've got a specific journal that you're looking for. If you're not familiar with interlibrary loan, we don't have access to everything directly, but we can get almost anything, especially if it's just a scan of it. And you use interlibrary loan to get copies of articles that we don't have access to. And if you're not like in commerce, you can have things sent to you that are physically here in the library. And if you're not familiar with Authenticate, that is something that also you will eventually deal with. And I am one of the ones that process those things for students. You don't have access to it directly. You have to give it to your advisor or give it to someone like me that has been identified by the graduate school as somebody that they want to assist with helping. And I can work with you on any problems that might be identified in that. Do y'all have any questions? That was really all that I had. kind of wanted to leave room. There were 8 people signed up, so I was expecting 8. But it was, I think actually I'm going to stop the recording now. And